Well, these sort of pots go back probably 200 or 300 years. But obviously all around the coast, all around the Cove, Devon and Cornwall, they're all slightly different. It don't really make any difference. They're just, as long as there's good bait in them, and it don't really matter how good or what they look like, they'll still catch the lobster because he's more interested, well, he's only interested in the food in the pot. So, you know, they've been on the go now for probably 300 years. Well, I got family been making pots now for as long as Cadgwith's been in existence. So it's, I mean, I don't know, 300 or 400 years probably, various sorts and shapes. Well, years ago, if you was going to go fishing, you had to learn how to make a pot. Everybody thinks it's marvellous now and it's a craft and work of art, but it didn't really. It's just you had to make them to go and earn a living. So you started off very young with a very heavy clip around the ear if you got it wrong, and you just part of the job, really. Oh, I used to hate it years ago, but it's just something you had to do. Yeah, well, mostly the pots sort of come in two bits, on the top and the bottom, and the experienced fisherman, he always made the top, and as a boy, the younger one, the crew in the boat, they put the bottoms in, which was a bit harder and sort of rougher sort of job. It didn't have to be quite so accurate as the top. So that's how you started. You started bottoming pots, and that took the whole winter. Well, my father was actually, when he first started making pots, he was taken out of school at 14 to go fishing in a fishing boat. And that's where he started. The first job was to go and cut the withies in the withy gardens. And the farmers used to charge them so much a bundle. So you can imagine how big the bundles was. They put the whole field of withies in one bundle if they could. So the poor boy had to carry them out across the fields and get them home. Well, I'm still quite surprised how many people are making pots now. And it's sort of, in Devon and Cornwall, there's probably a dozen. There's 3 or 4 in Cornwall, I know, a couple up in Devon. And it's sort of it's just a nice thing to do now, although it is part of my living. A lot of my pots go for films and television and props, not so many fishing as it used to be. But that'll still catch a lobster, which is what I dream about as I'm making it, which makes it sort of easy for me because I am thinking about catching lobsters in it. I mean, it's something I've always done, so I still quite enjoy it most of the time. It's always just a So this is the first job. The withies have already been pointed, and it's a long slender point, because when I make the mouth in a minute, I've actually got to get another 3 willows alongside the first one. So although this doesn't look much, it is one of the most important jobs of making a pot. And I actually just give them a quick turn on here, just to give them a bit of shape so they don't bend when I actually make the pot. This is a Mark 10 pot stand. All the old ones just stayed one level, but the safer's back, that goes up and down, so that's as modern as we get. I'm also making a lobster pot instead of a crab pot. The only difference is it's got a smaller entrance, a smaller mouth, because lobsters are a lot more mobile than crabs, so it tends to help them prevent them from escaping. So I thought everybody else would be probably making crab pots. I make a lobster pot, which doesn't make any difference in the actual shape of the pot. It's just the entrance is smaller.
Yeah. Rather than the back way.
Well, this sort of pot, I don't know, unique, but it's every village around the coast. Years ago, when they were all making them, you could tell who'd made the pot, and you know, some would bind the pot clockwise, some would go anti-clockwise. Some people would actually even make a pot sitting down with it on their lap, although that was a little bit of a mystery to me. But yeah, it's just sort of you could always tell mullion pots or culvert pots, especially if you got tangled up at sea, you would know whose was whose, because they're all just slightly different, really. I use black mole willows from Somerset, although I do actually cut what we call yellows locally in the winter, most of them grown in people's gardens, and but years ago they were we used to have some very, very big willow gardens that were cut every year, which you looked after. Each boat had its own garden, or they would go and buy them from the landowner to make your pots. It's just sort of generally speaking, in the winter, when they're putting the bottoms in, we use quite a lot of local willows then, because they're a little bit rougher, and you can use them up in the winter in the bottoms quite well, really. Yeah, we used to buy willow from Somerset, from the same firm I buy mine from now, Musgroves, and they were delivered to W. Harvey and Son in Newlyn, the shellfish people, and then they would distribute them around the various coves, ports, and then you would go off and start buying the willows, and they're all different sizes, different sizes for different jobs, but they're not over expensive now, but depends what they're like when they come. But normally they don't cut the willows until at least sort of end of November, and they're green and very, very supple. This time of year they've dried out and they've got to be soaked, but actually I soak mine, I take them to sea and stick them down about 60-70 feet, which then the water pressure has nothing to do with the water pressure penetrates them, and they sort of soak overnight, really, and they end up almost as flexible as proper winter willows. Well, we start making pots about Christmas time, really. Get all the willows cut first, get them all trimmed out, and then sort of almost probably as soon as Christmas is over, we start making pots. and that was it then for the rest of the winter. That's where you was making pots, and depending how big the boat was or how many crew were in the boat, that sort of depended on how many pots you had to make. There was no flowers around here, but what they did do is go and cut broccoli, and just for the local farmer. And I can remember the old man cutting broccoli for £2 a day, which I know sounds pretty ridiculous now, but then that's what it was in those days. And they'd make pots and go and cut broccoli when they were required. Well, as time went on, you would repair the pots as you fish them. You take extra bars with you, and if a bar was gone, you just repair it at sea. Then if one was particularly bad, you bring it in, replace it with a new one, and then just repair it in the shed and take it with you again the next time you went. Yeah, of course, years ago the fishing boats were a lot smaller than they are now, and yeah, you were controlled more by the tides and the weather than you are now. The boats now got bigger engines, and they sort of more or less come and go as they please, unless there's a storm. But and of course, even before me, there was it was sort of rowing and sails. So you sort of had to go with the tide and come back with the tide. It was no point trying to go against everything. So yeah, you went with the tide, come back with the tide, and that was just how it was in those days. But of course, everybody lived in the cove. It didn't like now. People live quite a long way away, some of them. So you could look after the boats on the beach. You didn't have to pull them up so far, because you actually live there. But everybody still works together quite well, even with these sort of restrictions now, where we get told now on the dreaded mobile phone, if there's something happening, then a message goes to everybody, and you can get down there quite quick and pull the boats in or whatever, what's going to be done. They didn't work with other members of the community, except for retired fishermen tended to hang around on the beach and help pulling the boats up and down the beach. And you know, some of them would go and help to mend the pots. Every boat had a sort of retired fisherman somewhere helping, and payment would be a couple of pints or a bit of baccy, because there wasn't an actual lot of money around, but they just liked doing it, but also you would give them something if you could. The old fishermen were funny. A lot of them, they had lots of stories, lots of them unrepeatable, but they were always game for a laugh, and it was always quite funny in the mornings. Sometimes they would tie the bows of the boats onto the chain when they were launching them by hand, and the older ones couldn't understand how the boat wasn't moving. That was usually us lot as kids just playing around. But yeah, it was a lot of people there living in those days. I mean, they all lived in the same place, and they all had the same, which was sort of nothing really. So it was a different community, although it's still quite a good community now. Everything just sort of slightly different. Things have changed so much because of the introduction of plastic and things, I think. Basically, all pots now, all fishing pots are made of plastic and steel. You don't see any of these anymore. They're sort of a plaything now, really. I mean, they wouldn't be commercially viable, really, except that anybody with a small boat, you can make a few from the willow from the hedgerow, and then within a couple of days you could have them at sea, just a rowing boat with a pair of paddles, and you could have lobster for dinner. It's sort of that sort of thing. But having said that, the sort of crawfish, or crayfish you probably call them, they're coming back in quantities, and these sort of pots will catch them better than steel pots. So I wouldn't be surprised if somebody doesn't have a go at making a few of these pots and just see if it is viable to catch them. One of the youngsters last year made quite a lot of French barrel pots out of wood, and they were good at catching them. He haven't tried that yet, but it's always interesting to see if if you can combine the old ways with modern stuff. Sometimes, you know, if it works well. Well, I think old and new pots are so different, really, because these are so vulnerable in the sea in bad weather compared with the new plastic and steel pots. They'll stand storms and all a lot more than these sort of pots, and they will last 4 or 5 years, which is a lot longer than these will last. But I suppose everything has moved on, but they are still quite nice to make, and nothing better than seeing a lobster in a real pot, you know, real willow pot compared with a plastic one. It's always a nice sight that you've actually caught it without any involvement of big commercial pots. Just nice to see that you've actually made the pot and caught the lobster and then eat the lobster. Is quite nice. Well, as I said, I started making pots when I started fishing with old man, and you just get involved. You either got to make the pots, or you don't go fishing. It's sort of as simple as that, because in those days you couldn't buy them, so we just had to make them, really. Well, when I first started making pots, I wasn't my best occupation. I got to say, I didn't take to it particularly well. So it probably took me 2 or 3 winters to actually learn how to do the bottoms properly. I never made tops in those days. That was down to the older one in the boat, the old man. He would make the tops. But after 2 or 3 years, you just sort of get used to doing it, and first ones I made were pretty awful. But it's just practice, really. Just like anything, you just got to keep plugging away, and you sort of vaguely get better as time goes on. Yeah, of course, most of my pots are used these days for television and films, films like period dramas, Poldark and all that sort of thing. Most of them go for that, and restaurants, just garden decoration, but not all of them. Occasionally somebody retired with too much money will buy one if he got a boat and just like to put one out and catch a lobster in it. few crabs and a few lobsters during the summer, well, that's pretty good. And at the end of the year, if he's still got it, he can then retire it to the garden and put flowers in it for a couple of years. So it's you know, it's a nice thing to do, really. Well, the other day I did have a phone call from somebody who I've dealt with for lots of years. It's a props department up in London, and they wanted 30 new pots, but they wanted them new, but to look old. So I've actually put these willows down in 60 or 70 feet of water, and it's sort of taken the skin off, so they look sort of, although they're brand new, they look sort of used, which is exactly what they want. But as you've seen a minute ago, one or two willows cracked off. I aren't really sure why that is. Making pots this time of year isn't a good occupation, so I probably won't make the whole 30. I'll make some for them to keep them happy and make the rest when I get the new willows in the autumn, November time, probably. Years ago, when they started making poldark, I mean, lots of films have had them, more than I can remember now, but and I often see them on TV. I mean, occasionally you see somebody else's, but not very often. And I always know mine, which is, they sort of turn up on these sort of 3-part films. But poldark, I saw they were making poldark years ago, so I just phoned them up and asked them and told them what I'd done. And I guess they probably had 60 or 70 over the period of time they were making it, which is all good fun, really. And in all fairness, it kept us going in the winter sometimes with the income from the pots. I don't sort of use these much now. I probably might use them a bit more, perhaps in a couple of years' time, when I even become more retired than I am now. Just got a small rowing boat and just put a few out to eat. But no, I don't either. My steel ones are sort of better than these in the way that you haven't got to worry about them so much. They'll last for a lot longer, and they're sort of easier to use, really. But I quite like putting these out. When I used to do boat trips, I used to keep a few out for the visitors to pull up. See a lobster in a real pot was always quite nice. Although there wasn't always a lobster in every pot, but when you see one and see the red horn sticking out before you get the pot up, it's always quite nice. Oh, I think it's nice to sort of save these old crafts without sort of going overboard, but it's just, well, I suppose in all fairness, I always think if there's a young fisherman that learnt how to make them, even if he carried on in the years to come making them for film sets, he got a bit of an income in the winter when they can't go to sea. So it's quite good for that. And you don't want to lose everything. It's nice little occupation to do. It's just like making baskets, really. And baskets are sort of making a bit of a comeback. People like shopping with a basket now over their arm, so it's quite nice, really. Well, I think to save the making of pots, it just sort of needs youngsters or a youngster occasionally to come along and have a go. Well, my pots probably are smaller than what the original big fishing pots were, because most of them were made for catching crawfish and big crabs, so they were bigger than this. and I keep these as small as I can because I post a lot off just in the normal post, so I don't want them too big because they don't need to be any bigger if they're for props or anything. So yeah, the big fishing pots years ago were a bit bigger than these, but when this is finished, this will catch a lobster, right? No problem. Well, I think probably making pots, I think still fishing with the boat sells the pots and the paintings, because people like to think there's a fisherman making pots and even painting a picture of a fishing boat. So I think it's quite important that I carry on fishing of some sort as long as I can, or at least playing around with a boat. So I suppose each one sort of helps the other one, really. Well, of course, when I was making these with the old man, they would have just used the black mole as it was. They wouldn't have bothered using the buff ones. These are buff willow. They're black mole, exactly the same, but they've been boiled and had the skins taken off. I just put them in there because they just add to the colour, really. But they wouldn't have used them years ago. I don't think they even knew they existed, to be quite honest. And you know, they were sort of rougher in the thing that they were bigger and heavier than these, so they always looked slightly bigger and I just try to keep mine as small as I can. And I've seen other people making them. A chap down Newlyn, he makes them and they're monster big things. But they look lovely, but they're it would take me too long, and also you know, I post them off in a normal post, so I don't want anything too big, really. Post is bad enough now, it's sort of 15 quid to post one, but people sort of manage to suffer that. But anything bigger, I don't know what it would be.
Fill up your glasses and let us be merry. For to roll and to thunder it is our intent, as we roam through the valley, where the lilies and the roses, and the beautiful cashmere lay drooping his head. Then away, then away, then away, to those caves in yonder mountains where the robbers retreat. Hark, hark, in the distance their footsteps approaching. Stand, stand and deliver, it is our watch cry. As we roam through the valleys, where the lilies and the roses, and the beautiful cashmere lay drooping his head. Then away, then away, then away, to those caves in yonder mountains where the robbers retreat. As I walk by the dockside one evening so fair, to view the salt water and take the salt air, I heard an old fisherman singing a song. Oh, take me away, boys, me time is not long. wrap me up in me old skins and jumper. No more on the docks I'll be seen. Just tell me old shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday on Fiddler's Green. Now Fiddler's Green is a place I've heard tell, where the fishermen go if they don't go to hell, where the weather is fair and the dolphins do play, and the cold coast of Greenland is far, far away. Wrap me up in me old skins and jumper, no more on the docks I'll be seen. Just tell me old shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday on Fiddler's Green, where the skies are all clear and there's never a gale, and the fish jump on board with one swish of their tail. Where you lie at your leisure, there's no work to do, and the skipper's below making tay for the crew. Wrap me up in me old skins and jumper, no more on the docks I'll be seen. Just tell me old shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday on Fiddler's Green. Now I don't want a harp, nor a halo, not me. Just give me a breeze and a good rolling sea. I'll play me old squeeze box as we sail along, with the wind in the rigging to sing me a song. Wrap me up in me old skins and jumper, no more on the docks I'll be seen. Just tell me old shipmates, I'm taking a trip, mates, and I'll see you someday on Fiddler's Green.
Across the wide ocean at the dawn of the day, across the wide ocean, my love, I can't stay. A new life is calling far, far away. Families and children are making their way. Haul away, drift away, the new world calls, this is our day. Haul away, drift away, on the Mayflower we're bound away. Through storms and blizzards will we ever be blessed, our destiny chosen and we cannot rest. Starving and frozen to come what may, for our safe deliverance we all must pray. Haul away, drift away, the new world calls, this is our day. Haul away, drift away, on the Mayflower we're bound away. This is our day. Haul away, drift away, on the Mayflower we're bound away. Now land is sighted, Cape Cod to the west, Oceanus is crying at his mother's breast. Sickness and death are our only only friends. Jones must keep pushing unto the end. Haul away, drift away, the New World calls, this is our day. Haul away, drift away, on the Mayflower we're bound away. Looting and stealing we must survive. God will guide us and he will decide. Steer to the south past Virginia dock. Mary, the First Lady, steps on Plymouth Rock. Haul away, drift away, the New World calls, this is our day. Haul away, drift away, on the Mayflower we're bound away. Haul away, drift away, the New World calls, this is our day.